welcome to Talking Radio Podcast, episode 3. Today's episode is concentrating on the phonetic alphabet. What is the phonetic alphabet? For some of you out there that have listened to episode 2 in the Talking Radio series, you would have seen that we already, or you wouldn't have seen, you would have heard us talking a little bit about the phonetic alphabet. I was ready to move on with the next section of the series in the Talking Radio podcast. But after this past few days, the number of queries I've received from you, the listener out there, asking to spend a bit more time and to discuss, questions like, why do we have to use the phonetic alphabet? What's the purpose of the phonetic alphabet? I decided to just spend a couple more minutes on the phonetic alphabet itself and focus on some interesting concepts. So the first thing about the phonetic alphabet, as you've probably worked out already, is that it's the English language developed. It's developed using, listen to my English, the phonetic alphabet was developed using English as the primary language of choice for that. Now, around 2007, ICAO introduced the aviation English concept. This involved us as pilots and air traffic controllers and base operators having to complete or conduct an aviation language proficiency test. And there's certain mediums involved in how this test is conducted and why is this being tested in this medium, how come what's the reason behind it, etc. Many questions that revolve around the ICAO aviation language and the test. This is discussed later in my podcast series, and also have this in a training format in terms of aviation English prep, which we'll discuss at a later stage. For today, we just want to focus on the phonetic alphabet itself and the lead up to the application of it. So, with phonetic alphabet, the important thing to remember is that it's a set letter or a set term for each letter in the alphabet itself, going from letters A to Z or Z. Depends how you pronounce that last letter. Okay. Ultimately, it's the same. It's written the same, and it means the same thing. Now, the phonetic alphabet is used to ensure that communication between two parties using it is not going to lead to any unnecessary ambiguity or confusion. In the previous episode, I spoke briefly about aircraft registrations and used that as the example illustration as to the importance and significance with the phonetic alphabet and how this has been derived and developed over the years in terms of procedures linked to it, specifically coming from ICAO and then moving through those states that are registered with ICAO in terms of application into the registration of the country and registration of the aircraft and so on. So I mentioned those that are registered with ICAO, so those contracting states. Now there are a number of contracting states, or let's rephrase it. There are a number of states that are not contracted to ICAO. Your question would be, what about them? Do they use phonetic alphabet as well? Or do they have their own alphabet, seeing as they're not following the ICAO model? The answer is, everyone globally uses the phonetic alphabet. Now that includes the marine industry as well. Just out of interest with it, though, in the marine industry, they are slowly moving into testing people going to work offshore on the oil rigs in the North Sea, for example. They do have to do an ICAO language test. So this is significant in the application, in the requirements, and in terms of the vision. Why are we doing that? But again, I'm digressing from the episode for today, which is phonetic alphabet. So we'll discuss that, the ICAO language test itself at a later stage. But you can see how the two are also linked in terms of application. If we all had, for say the letter A, if we all had our own version or interpretation of that letter, there would be lots of confusion in the communication with between the parties on frequency. Now remember, when you're communicating on frequency, just like I'm speaking to you on this microphone right now, we have ambient sounds taking place as well. What could that be? In this studio that I'm speaking from, I have all the measures in place, but to curb background noise. But things can happen quite easily, and I'm not finished this recording yet. Maybe I'll drop a pen on the floor or something that creates a sound which is not planned or it's not rehearsed. The same goes in the aircraft when the pilot's going to communicate on frequency. Just think about it, he's also speaking into a microphone of sorts. He's pushing the PTT, the push to talk on the handheld radio or on the microphone, depends what medium of aircraft he's flying. And then he's going to speak on that frequency. When he selects that PTT, the ambience, so the area around the radio, is naturally going to be transmitting on the frequency that this person or persons are talking on. Then that is unintentional from the person who's speaking on the frequency. It's not the intention to capture those sounds. Their primary focus is to speak on frequency. So if you consider that factor, and now the person using the phonetic alphabet as part of their communication procedures, you can already identify that if this person had to come up with their own phonetic and their own choice for these letters in the alphabet, how confusing this could be, adding to the background noise which we're already experiencing. Now, I'm not saying we're always going to have a background noise, just like I won't always have background noise here in the studio, but we can't work on hope and say, yes, we definitely, today is a good day to fly, and there's not, the chances of us experiencing background noise is really remote. We have to take all factors into account to ensure that we're going to conduct as safe a flight as we can. In air traffic control, we say our objective is to maintain a safe, orderly and expeditious flow of air traffic. So just like the pilot speaking phonetic, we in return are going to speak phonetic back to that pilot. Now, what's interesting with phonetic is we don't always use it as we know it in the phonetic alphabet itself. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you take it with pressure setting, for example, the pilot needs a pressure setting from air traffic control. Now that pressure setting is called the Q and H. The Q, the N and the H does mean something for certain people. If you go into the history of the Q and H, you see that it derives from what was called the Q code, and the Q code dates back to the World War II, or Second World War, where this was used to mean various things. Okay, so it's a shortened form of communication, not Morse code. You can't say it's like Morse code, but it's like a shortened version of communication to mean maybe many things. I'm just using the Q and H in this example, and Q and H is meaning to you, and those that know it or in the know, they know that means the atmospheric pressure setting. But now when the air traffic controller supplies this information to the pilot, he or she does not say the Quebec November Hotel. Now that's the phonetic for Q and H, and then give them the pressure setting. The ATC will say the Q in H is, and then pass them that information. But when he's speaking to the registration of the aircraft, or he's speaking to the pilot of the aircraft using their registration, he will say Alpha Bravo Charlie, for example. That's the registration of this example aircraft. Now that is maybe a bit confusing. Why are we using the phonetic alphabet in certain instances and in other instances we're not? Now, this might seem like a really lame excuse that I'm trying to portray here in what I'm about to say as a reason for the term Q and H not being Quebec November Hotel. Firstly, we'll start with one of the common reasons would be that this is it's globally known as the definition of atmospheric pressure setting. So most pilots or most people in aviation will first call it QNH before they call it atmospheric pressure setting, which is a much longer word as well. The second reason that I'm putting into the mix here is if you listen QNH and then you listen to the phonetic Quebec November Hotel, if you were to time me in saying either one of those two transmissions, you'll find that Quebec November Hotel is taking approximately 0.8 to 1 second longer than QNH on the frequency. In a busy sequence, in a busy environment where there's lots of aircraft, remember, air traffic control has to supply QNH to every single aircraft on frequency within their sector of airspace that they are controlling or managing at that time. So this is lots of repetition as well. This would be the third thing added to this, is repetition of the same term. Everybody gets to know QNH and its meaning and what's it related to in terms of the atmospheric pressure. Okay, so my three reasons that I'm putting forward is my version of events of the QNH. It might not necessarily be 100% correct as to what I'm saying, and there might not be even somebody that can tell us why don't we actually just say Quebec November Hotel and keep it standard, because after all, that's how we're working in aviation. Everything is standard and there's a procedure involved. But I'm afraid there's nobody that's been able to give me a real reason why it is as such. And I've been involved in the aviation industry, teaching radio telephony for nearly 30 years now. I enjoy the subject immensely, and these are the kind of questions that I put out there, and we don't always have the answer to it. And we don't always want, as a human, sometimes we just accept everything, and we shouldn't just be accepting that this is what it means. But we also need to look at the bigger picture. Okay, so I'm just giving that, just focusing on the QNH as an example of this difference in setting between the actual application of phonetic and then the non-application and acceptance of a term which ideally should follow the phonetic. Now we'll just look at a few letters in the phonetic alphabet itself. There is a course which I supply on this subject as well with regards to learning the phonetic alphabet. So in terms of that, if we just look at that briefly, the phonetic alphabet is something that you could learn over 26 days ideally, taking one letter each day and focusing on it. So for example, today we're going to learn the letter A, and A stands for alpha. That is spelled A-L-P-H-A, alpha, pronounced in phonetic, Alpha Lima, Papa Hotel Alpha. Now, you could learn one letter a day for 26 days, and so more likely after 1 month, you should have the phonetic alphabet under control. And it's going to help you tremendously when you're going into communication on frequency. Quite often I find that if I'm going to do testing of a pilot in RT, in radio telephony, they will know the registration of the aircraft that they're flying in because they're using that registration all the time. But they might not necessarily know all the letters of the phonetic if I ask them to spell their name or surname in phonetic alphabet. That is the big reason that has happened or occurred is that this person hasn't been guided and told the actual reason behind the phonetic alphabet and the application of it in principle in our daily aviation world and communication. So for you that are listening out there, remember that this is part of your communication, as part of who you are when you're on frequency. You have to be able to interpret and be able to communicate in one set language, and that is phonetic alphabet. So coming back to what I said earlier, before I digressed, is let's look at a few of the letters and just break them down. I'll show you a couple of errors that we experience with them. The first letter, which is the most common letter where we have a problem as such, or an error occurring, is the letter F. Now in the phonetic alphabet, in accordance with Archaea, F stands for Foxtrot. In the operational environment on frequency, often a pilot will say Fox. So can you hear the abbreviation? Fox for Foxtrot. Why would somebody say Fox when it's actually Foxtrot? Why have they done this? Why have they cut it as such into two terms and then only used the first part of that term? There is no real answer for this except saying that when this person learned phonetic, they either learned the phonetic alphabet from somebody that had used the word or learned the word fox from somebody that they had learned from, and so on. This person might have only learned to use or apply the phonetic alphabet in flight. So in flight, they always heard the instructor saying fox, and so they started to use fox as well. Nowadays, we've got lots of social media that can assist us with this. We can go to Google, have a look and see what does the letter fox mean. But maybe this person was taken on first hand saying, well, my instructor says fox, so that means fox is correct, and that's what I'm going to use. Now, this is not ideal because this is just going to degenerate as the years go by and as this person applies fox in the industry and so on. Now, ICAO could have maybe come out with the word fox for the letter F when they put the phonetic alphabet together, but this was not to be. The letter the word foxtrot was a word that was designated for the letter F. So if you're going to communicate on frequency and you're going to follow all the procedures, you need to think to yourself, I need to apply myself in communication, and I need to be as professional as I can be when I'm speaking on the radio, so that when I transmit an information to others, that they will be able to understand it first time. There's not going to be an ambiguity or confusion, and the good chance of them or the chances of them coming back to me and telling me to say again, so basically to repeat my message, is less than 1% chance, okay, because there's always a chance that they might still ask you, but at least the chances are way less than if you are using a phonetic alphabet that is not correct, that you haven't done proper research on, that you haven't learned, or that you are developing as you go along. With the phonetic alphabet, stick to the basics, stick to the procedure. Don't go left or right of that, and apply yourself. Okay, so we looked at the letter F and we showed you the breakup there with the term the fox and the trot, and the application or the pronunciation is foxtrot. So there's a slight pause between the fox, and so that's the letter X, and then the trot, that's the letter T, and that's your breathing space, foxtrot, rather than foxtrot. Okay, you do need the breathing space with it. One of the letters of the phonetic alphabet which is quite interesting is the letter I, because the letter I originally was pronounced in the phonetic as indigo, and later on it became known as, or it was changed to India. Why this changed and when it changed, that is something I am not sure about, but when I do the testing for radio, I quite often come across a pilot that will still say indigo in the, if maybe I'm asking them to spell their name for me and it happens to have the letter I. So even as somebody that's testing the phonetic alphabet, unless we ask the applicant to pronounce each letter of the phonetic and to make sure that they are using it correctly, then we also might miss the fact that they don't know the entire alphabet, or that they've used a letter which they were taught by somebody who used to use that letter and that term for that letter, in this case the letter I. So make sure when you are using or studying the phonetic alphabet that you are studying a recent version. Now what I mean about a recent version is not in 2021, but it's something that's been around for a good couple of years. You might also want to back the version that you're learning on, say, Google, where you've called it up, with a version which is available in ICAO on their website. Just on their website, type in phonetic alphabet. You don't need to know all the appendices and all the document numbers and the control. You can just try that, have a look and see, and then balance the two. But in terms from my side, the letter I stands for, in the phonetic alphabet, stands for India. If you're using something like Kellogg's, where it should be kilo, you are creating confusion on frequency. The people are not sure what you're saying. Remember, when you're in flight, maybe you're flying inside the general flying area, there's many other students flying in your area. You've got people from different backgrounds, different nationalities. Not everybody has the good fortune of having English as their first language, and they are learning as they proceed. Maybe this student is preparing themselves for the aviation English test under the guidance from the instructor, but they're hearing this false, or these terms that have been used which are not correct. And you, as the person that's using that phonetic in your own dialogue, are misleading people on frequency to start using their own derived phonetic alphabet as well, assuming that everybody knows what that letter means. So this is very important. I'm not going to really use every single letter in the alphabet to explain this, because as I say, this is done on one of my courses on another product which is called Udemy. So that one you can always look up. But if you are going to apply this, there's obviously, as I said earlier, you can go into Google. There's the phonetic alphabet is there. It's freely available to look at and to teach yourself on it, with the focus of being able to speak professionally on frequency and not causing any confusion or ambiguity in your operational environment. This also goes all the way from the person working on the ground, we call that person the base operator, and then of course to the pilot and the air traffic controller. So to summarize with the phonetic alphabet, this is it's a very important application that we use within our operational and daily flying lives, and as air traffic controllers, we need to apply it inside our working environment. It's not something that we're going to take with us into our home environment, because the aviation industry have to realize that not everybody knows even what the word phonetic, if you say phonetic, they don't know that phonetic comes or is derived from and means that you're talking an alphabet which is completely separate from that which they know. So you have to maybe you have to put yourself in two separate worlds. In the aviation world, you're applying the phonetic alphabet, and outside of that, you're applying just the alphabet that you are familiar with, so as not to cause confusion amongst those around you. Especially if you're trying to spell your name to somebody and you're trying to use all the phonetic, remember that the person on the other side might not necessarily know what you are talking about. In the same breath, that person on the other side might be passing you information and giving it to you in a self-derived application for them to help with the understanding of the meaning of that letter. So for example, A, they could be saying apple. You know it stands for alpha. Now, you've got one of two approaches to this. Number one, you can say alpha to yourself. You know what the letter A. And B, you can try and correct the person on the other side. But it's very hard, and I've experienced this, it's very hard to try and correct the other person if that person doesn't even know what the phonetic alphabet is. So as I said earlier, just go with it in your daily lives outside of aviation, but in the aviation industry, and you're speaking on frequency and you're communicating in a professional manner, always apply the phonetic alphabet as it is published in the English language. Okay, I hope that helps those of you that wanted to find out a little bit more about the phonetic and its application. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in episode 4. Thank you very much. Goodbye.